Good morning and welcome to Flashpoint. I'm Lauren Rowe. Thanks for joining us this morning. For decades now, the state of Florida has tried to do the right thing to protect our natural resources. A land acquisition program called Florida Forever. The state purchases the most critically sensitive lands for habitat protection, water quality, and environmental activities. But when the recession hit, Florida Forever was gutted. It went from $300 million down to zero to purchase lands. Eventually, it climbed up to where it is now, $20 million. Now that the budget is in the black, people who care about our environment want the funds restored. Today, we're going to talk about the grassroots effort to put an amendment on the ballot and why these lands are critical to the future health of our families. And of course, it is Flashpoint. So we'll talk a little politics too. And that's why we have our friend, Senator David Simmons here. As you know, he represents the 10th District in Florida, which is all of Seminole County and West Volusia. He lives in Altamont Springs. He's a Republican. David, thanks as always for coming on board today. And I also have Chuck O'Neill. He is with the League of Women Voters Florida. He's the chairman of the Natural Resources Committee. And Chuck's main job is to assess and then lobby, right, for the League of Women Voters on different stances. And for those of you who do not follow the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan group that takes different issues, studies them very seriously, and then tries to have a stand on some of those issues to help you and educate the voters in their decisions. All right, let's begin, Senator, with you. Why have we not restored Florida Forever funds to a higher level than $20 million?
Well, Florida historically has done great things with respect to preservation and with its tremendous natural resources. And we funded in the legislature hundreds of millions of dollars over many years in order to acquire lands and to preserve our natural resources. But when the Great Recession hit, it affected everything. And Florida does not have an ability to borrow money. We're constitutionally prohibited from borrowing money to pay our bills. And so what we had to do, of course, is tighten our belts. But now we're back in the black. We expect that there'll be over an $800 million surplus in the coming year. And it's time for us, I believe, to begin reinvesting in our natural resources.
There has been a lot of talk recently about this extra $50 million and that it's not a true acquisition, because the extra $50 million would be to sell off lands that Florida Forever already owns, essentially, in that program. And it's a trust, right?
Yes.
Yes. Sell off lands that are already in this trust to buy more critical lands. And a lot of environmentalists are saying, no, why sell off what we already own to purchase more critical lands? Why not just put in the money to just continue to purchase lands that we know are critical?
Well, I agree with that to some extent. We certainly don't want to sell off important lands just to trade off to try to get something that we think is equally or more important. We need to make sure that we preserve that which is really important. If there are lands that are not so important because they were bought as part of a larger acquisition and now we realize that it's not as necessary, there's no need to keep that when we can use it for much better purposes.
Is the stance by a lot of environmentalists, though, that you really can't own too much land nowadays?
Yes, Lauren, it's pretty difficult to own too much land, especially when most of it is recharge land for the aquifer. And certainly we need that land in order to keep the aquifer sufficient to provide for our houses, our businesses, and our agriculture.
And we're going to get more specific about the aquifer and why it's so important here during this program. But let's go ahead and talk about this grassroots effort to not wait for the legislature to go ahead and bring more of those funds into land acquisition. This is a special amendment that they're trying to get on the ballot. It's a petition. How many signatures it has right now, or how close you are to getting it on the ballot, or how close they are?
It's on track. We need 683,149.
Okay.
To get it on the ballot.
Let's go ahead and read it real quick, just so you can see what it is. It's the Land and Water Conservation Amendment. It says it funds the Land Acquisition Trust Fund to acquire, restore, improve, and manage conservation lands, including wetlands and forests, fish and wildlife habitat, lands protecting water resources, and drinking water sources, including the Everglades and the water quality of rivers, lakes and streams, beaches and shores, outdoor recreational lands, working farms and ranches, and historic or geologic sites by, here we go, dedicating 33% of net revenues from the existing excise tax on documents for 20 years. So what exactly does that mean, Chuck?
Well, what that boils down to is for years we've collected doc stamps on mortgages and deeds. And what this does is it walls off 33% of that doc stamp revenue to buy lands and fund Florida Forever. Now, that money has been going to Florida Forever up to this year, because what we've been doing is we've been paying off bonds that were purchased back in the early 90s to buy large parcels, large sums of land. So what we're doing is we're just continuing what's there. This is not requiring a new tax. This is taking a tax that's been used and just basically walling it off so that it cannot be invaded.
So let me get this straight. How much of that 33% of the doc stamps that was going to land acquisition has been raided, so to speak? Do you know, David?
Well, it's not so much as rated as the fact is that the number and the amount of documentary stamps collections plummeted during the Great Recession because it's based upon the deeds, conveyances of real property. And when the amount of conveyances dropped dramatically, obviously, those monies dropped precipitously. So
what would you say is the percentage now from doc stamps going to land acquisition?
Well, I mean, you're looking at, if we're only talking $20 million, not a whole lot.
Okay. So Chuck, the devil's advocate here would say, I know that land acquisition is important, but in this present economy, with people being pinched so tightly, is 33% asking too much right now? Does it really need to be that level, or can it be raised gradually? And how well do you think this amendment will do if it actually makes it onto the ballot in November?
Well, we're very hopeful that once it does make it onto the amendment, that it will be passed. Over 80% of conservation amendments, when left to the voters, are passed. So the big hurdle is to get it onto the ballot, the 2014 ballot, and once it's there, we feel pretty confident the voters will support it.
And this is 2014 ballot. Excuse me, I said this November. It would be the next November. What do you think about this amendment?
Well, obviously, what happens is when we do constitutional amendments by petition, there's no flexibility that is left. And obviously, that is a concern that anyone would have. But at the same time, I applaud the desire to do something because something needs to be done now. And I do believe that it's not just simply allocating certain monies to buy lands for conservation purposes. It's got to be more than that, because our biggest problems result from, for example, relating to the Wekiva Basin. We're not talking about just purchasing lands is going to solve the problem. There needs to be a solution that deals with the sources for the nitrate and phosphorus that are going in and destroying that. Acquiring more lands is not the solution for that. It's a partial solution, but it's not the total solution. We need to make sure that for example, the septic tanks that produce approximately 26% of the cause of the problem there, that we do something with that. Fertilizers constitute 48% of the sources for the Wekiva affluent increase in the amount of nitrates and phosphates. So we've got to do something about the source as well. And we need to do that for every water body that we have in the state of Florida.
Okay. We are going to now take a break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about the aquifer. We're going to get a little scientific on everybody and let you see why it is so important. Most of us rely on that groundwater, and it's in danger. Right here on Flashpoint. Stay with us. That's a good day on the Wekiva River Basin. It may not look like a good day for you if you're out there fishing or canoeing, but that rain is what continues to charge our aquifers and supply the groundwater that 93% of Floridians depend on that groundwater to live in this state. We are more dependent than any other state in the country. And so if you don't think water is important, it's crucial that you listen to the next 10 minutes of this program. The Wekiva River Basin, if you were going to give it a scale of 1 to 10 on the health of it, what would you give it?
Well, Chuck probably agrees with me on it. It's headed towards a crisis, and some people would believe it's already reached that level.
And why is that?
Well, the amount of nitrates and phosphates that are going into it, particularly within the last several years, has increased the amount of nitrate levels that nutrient levels, so that algae is growing there, and it's destroying the springs and the river.
Let's go ahead and take a look at this graphic that I pulled up. You know, it's kind of scientific, kind of not. Chuck, can you walk me through it quickly on how an aquifer works, just for those people who know the term, but they don't really quite understand how the water goes down into it?
Sure.
And what the sources of contamination could be?
Sure. The water comes through rain 54 inches a year on average, lands upon the ground, and then of that 54 inches, 38 inches is lost to evaporation. 9 inches runs off, as you see in the slope in the graph, runs off into rivers, streams that end up in the ocean. Only 7 inches actually makes it down into the aquifer itself. And the aquifer is divided into an upper and lower aquifer. And the springs, such as Wekiwa Springs, draws water from both sources as well as a superficial aquifer.
And I've heard that the springs are almost a window into the aquifer. The condition of the springs is very indicative of the health of the aquifer itself. And we do know that our springs, as you mentioned, have more algae blooms. We've got more contamination, more fish kills, people getting sick more often. So that could you say, undeniably a result of pollution that could be affecting our aquifer?
I believe that.
Yes.
I believe that. I believe that the target amount of nutrient level is about 0.286 milligrams per liter. It's putting out right now, what, 0.9? Something like that. And the fact of it is that we already know that when you get up to the amount, for example, when you have the wastewater treatment facilities putting out about 7 or 8 milligrams of nutrients per liter. This is way in excess of what it ought to be. If those are making it over into to the springs, then obviously, Lauren, we've got a significant problem. And making it down into the aquifer, we've got a significant problem.
All right. The legislature, from what I have gathered after living here 13 years, not big fans of regulatory legislation, and that is what you're going to be proposing sometime soon, right? Who else is working on this bill with you for water protection?
Well, fortunately, I've spoken to many of my compatriots, colleagues in both the House and the Senate, and they realize that the time has come, that we have to do something about this. And I look at it as a 10-year plan, something that gives reachable but definable goals that must be attained by local governments, give local governments the flexibility, and also assist them with some funding to make sure that over a period of time, and not 20 years, not 30 years, but in fact, Lauren, 10 years, something that we can all look at and say, yes, this is a little aggressive, but the fact is that this is when we need to get it done and make definable material gains.
So what is it going to mean to the average person washing right now? First, let's talk about those people with septic tanks. What kind of regulations are going to affect them if this kind of legislation would pass?
Well, and you know, that's been a very, very
touchy,
toxic issue.
And toxic, not even touchy. It's been a toxic issue. It has. It's been very.
And I think that the solution is that we cannot charge our residents anything for this. What we need to do is make sure that we assist local governments and that we adopt what I call a worst first approach. That there are people who live next to waterways that we can go ahead and move them on to city or municipal water and sewer, and that we can assist them by paying for that and funding that, so that it's not going to cost them anything. But what we're going to do is, we know, and I've met with city governments already and local governments, and they say, look, we can go ahead. We've got the lines laid right now in various very, very important areas that we could go ahead and move people over into city water and sewer. And so that's what we want to do, and we want to make sure that local governments are assisted in that, and that we're not going to end up charging our residents for doing it.
Chuck O'Neill, League of Women Voters. Politically, how realistic is this?
I think it's definitely realistic because people around the state are seeing what's happening to our waterways, in particular the Indian River Lagoon. That's almost in a state of collapse right now. The Wekiva River is...
We had a fish kill this week.
Fish kill this week, manatees, dolphins, pelicans. It's really a statewide tragedy, and I think it's waking people up around the state.
Okay, what else? We did talk a little bit about the water treatment plants. So septic tanks, big contributor, yes?
Yes, they are significant.
What's next?
I mean, septic tanks for the Wekiva Basin are about 26% of
Which
the
is
problem.
a lot.
Agricultural fertilizer, 26%, residential fertilizer, 15%. So you're looking at over 45% of, when you add in golf fertilizer and other fertilizer, it's 48%.
Let's look at this Wekiva River Basin map there. That is a large amount. You can see I-4 there. I know this is, you're looking at it and it looks like a bunch of Legos there, but you can see I-4 right there down on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. This is a huge amount of space that feeds this aquifer. And you can imagine the golf courses up there in Seminole County. You got some really nice golf courses. Residents up there, lots of grass, lots of sod up there in Seminole County. How are you going to turn that around? Golf courses are not going away. People are not getting rid of their yards up there in Heathrow. What are you going to do about that?
Best management practices, and probably for residential, looking at a model ordinance that could be used that is not too onerous, but provides for realistic goals for local governments to attain with their residents. For example,
I'll give you an example.
Fertilizer that is time release, and the amounts that are in fact being put on. For example, right now we know that if we're using reclaimed water, it already has nutrients, significant nutrient levels in it. Why do you need to put fertilizer on when you're already putting reclaimed water with high nutrient levels in it?
And tell that to my husband, right? Well, I mean, that's what people shaking their heads at home.
Best management practices. Okay. If in fact we just learn to do it right, we will in fact begin to make noticeable and measurable difference.
Okay, but we've got some other problems out there. Water reclamation, wastewater treatment. We create the waste. It's got to get cleaned up somehow. Where does it go? We'll talk about that when we come back here on the other side of Flashpoint. Stay with us. Okay, wastewater treatment facilities, they are complicated. You know, we have wastewater, it has to be treated. They want to reclaim the water and reuse it. We just talked about irrigation being one of the good ways that you can use it. This picture is a picture of Conserve 2. This is a wastewater treatment facility in West Orange County. And you believe, Chuck, and the League of Women Voters actually hired someone to study it, you believe that they are polluting the Wekiva Springs. In what way?
The Water Conserve 2 facility is located right in the middle of the Wekiva Basin. It is up gradient from the Wekiva River. In other words, if you look at the...
Upstream?
Yeah, you can say it's, you know, it's pretty common that water flows downhill. And this is basically uphill from the Wekiva River. There are 39 million gallons of treated wastewater released into the ground at that point. Their standard set by the DEP is 10 milligrams per liter. Now, I find it hard to believe that you can release water up there at 10 milligrams per liter in nitrates, and then by the time it gets to the springs, it's going to be 0.286. It's just a huge leap to say that that water is going to be completely clean by the time it reaches the river. Now, the other thing is our karst...
Do we have any proof so far, though, that it isn't diluted enough before it reaches the river?
I don't think there's any proof to show that it is not diluted enough. What we've been calling for is a dye trace study that would inject dye at a well at the facility and then see where it comes out. See where it comes out and also how long it takes. Their study that they did based on modeling, they say it takes 105 years for the water to get from that point to the springs. And we're saying, based on our modeling, it takes in the neighborhood of 3 months.
Wow.
Big
well, that's
difference.
quite a discrepancy there. And David, you agree that you believe the study should be done. Why? It seems simple enough to do the study, especially if it might just be a 3-month ordeal.
I fully agree, because the answer to all of this is that it's always best to know what the truth is. We should never be afraid of what the truth is. If in fact that is a significant source, a recent source for nitrate effluent or levels of nitrates in the Wekiva Springs, then we need to know it.
Why do we not have dye tests at all wastewater treatment facilities to make sure they're not polluting the groundwater?
Well, it costs money to do these things, but I can tell you this, that the concern that many of us have right now is that there's a certain point in time when you quit studying, because what's happened is we know, based upon the MacTech results and study that was done in 2010, that there are 4 or 5 significant causes, and if they're going to sit around the table and point fingers at each other all the time, we're never going to get anything done. Okay, is someone a 26% causal effect of this, or are they a 10% cause of this? The answer is you are a cause of it. Every one of you needs to go ahead and take a part in reducing the amount of nitrates and phosphates that you are in fact releasing into the environment.
Good luck on your legislation. The amendment, quickly, we've got about 30 seconds. Again, the Land and Water Conservation Amendment, the petition's there. You can find it. You can find it on the League's website, right?
On the League's website, or you could go to the website for the Florida's Water and Land Legacy.org. And, one quick thing, the money that's going to be set aside could be used for things like what we're talking about now, upgrading wastewater treatment facilities, tying in septic tanks to those facilities. This is a desperately needed measure, and I hope the voters of the state of Florida can see that.
Okay, and I'll put it all on my Facebook page as well. Facebook.com/Lauren Rowe News. We're out of time. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a great week. Tell your friends about Flashpoint.